Hello, Willowbrook family. Today's daily Devo is found in Acts chapter 21. When we seek God's guidance, it's often because we want a good outcome. We seek His guidance because we don't want to experience pain or hardship. We want to make the right choices that will make things easier for us and make us happy. But we all know that sometimes God does His best work in our lives and His kingdom through adversity. Throughout my life, I've grown the most in the Lord through times of hardship and unknown. So it stands to reason that sometimes God will purposely lead us into adversity. And this is what we see in Acts chapter 21. After a long missionary journey, Paul is on his way back to his home. But there is trouble waiting for him in Jerusalem. Many people want Paul dead. In his journey home, Paul stops at various places, and there are times when he encounters other believers, and they warn Paul that going back to Jerusalem will be dangerous. In verse 3, we see that Paul stays in Tyre for 7 days. The disciples were repeatedly telling Paul not to set foot in Jerusalem. They said that this message is from the Spirit. But Paul remained insistent that he must return. So, was Paul disobeying the Spirit by not heeding their warning? Most scholars agree that it was God's will for Paul to return to Jerusalem. Sometimes, when God is calling you into a difficult chapter of your life, He will use others to help prepare you for the challenge. I believe the Spirit used them to help plant the seed into Paul's heart that rough times lay ahead. But I also think that when these disciples saw the danger in their flesh, they wanted Paul to avoid it. But Paul knew what he had to do. Now, after this, Paul made another stop in Caesarea to see Philip, and the Spirit of the Lord worked again. While at Philip's house, a prophet named Agabus came to see Paul. He gave Paul a visual demonstration of what would happen to him by binding his hands and his feet with Paul's own belt. It's almost like God was saying, "This is what awaits you in Jerusalem. Are you committed enough to do this?" Now, when the other disciples see this in their flesh, they beg him not to go. But Paul knew deep down what he had to do. The people saw Paul's resolve and finally said, "The will of the Lord be done." And that's what we should be saying. When we face an unknown future, instead of praying that we will never experience pain, we should pray, "The will of the Lord be done." We never need to get in the way of God's plan just because of our own comfort. And in the rest of the chapter, we see the continuation of God's plan unfolding. There are many false rumors spreading around the city about Paul, and Paul does his due diligence to correct them, and he even publicly purifies himself. Paul had not turned his back on the law of Moses, but he has preached that Christ has fulfilled it. But the people were incensed, and they began to beat Paul and kill him. Fortunately, the Romans intervened and arrested Paul. And as they were taking him away, Paul had the opportunity to address the angry crowd. All those eyes and ears were on Paul. And so the will of the Lord was done. Yes, Paul was committed enough to go through this. He would face many hardships after that day, but he furthered God's kingdom in a way that he would never have imagined. And as we face hardships and unknown, let us say the same thing. The will of the Lord be done. Have a great day in the Lord, Willowbrook.